Hi everybody, welcome to Astro Pills Astrology. My name's Sam Dudgeon. I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine and astrologer, and we're going to look at Saturn ingressing into Aries. And there's obviously a lot of planetary action going on at the moment. We're right on the eclipse in Aries. I'm down here in Australia, and there's a lot of planetary activity going on at the moment, but I don't want to talk too much about the astrological weather. We'll just focus on Saturn in Aries. And I also wanted to state that I have a Chinese astrology webinar. It's called Chinese Astrology 101. It's on my website for those who are interested to jump in on that. I'm going to cover Chinese astrological charts for people who enroll into this webinar, plus the basic rundowns of Chinese astrology, how it all works, how it all clicks. And if you visit my website, astropillars.com.au, you can register there if you're interested, because I've had a few people sign up, which is great. I'm just putting it out there because this is one of the first times I've actually done this, but I want to bring Chinese Astro out to the world a little bit. Not many people really know too much about it. So there you go. If you're interested in that, go for it. Also, I have on my website subscription to my newsletter, so please subscribe, because I'm going to do future events on all things astro as best I can. So let's look at this, because Saturn ingressing into Aries is a monumental one, actually, because I'm wondering how it's going to play out, actually, because of the history of Australia and this kind of thing. But I'll mention what happened 30 years ago around that, because this is interesting for sure. So Saturn's all about discipline. Aries is all about initiating, pioneering, entrepreneurship. It's cardinal fire, and of course this ingresses into 0 degrees Aries, which is what they call the cardinal signs of the world point. So it's going to really affect the world stage. This is why it's going to be monumental. Saturn is also about how we seek and to preserve ourselves, right, through effort. This is what Saturn is. Saturn's nothing to be feared. Everyone knows about the Saturn return, all these kind of things. Everyone raves on about it. But it's actually Saturn, in my opinion, out of all the planets, is one that is really important, because the planet Saturn is the initiator into reality, and is the initiator into, in my opinion, high levels of consciousness and the mystical realms, if you learn how to master the energy of Saturn. So I'm just putting that out there. But yeah, so I find this aspect, funnily enough, I'm kind of getting pretty familiar with, obviously, because I've got a Saturn Mars conjunction coming up, which is going to play out on a similar level, obviously, because Aries rules Mars. But, we've got Mars's energies. Saturn can be sloth. Mars, it can be anger. It can be, and then you got the flip sides of things, right? And Saturn can be depression, this kind of thing. And it's like, you want to move forward with this cardinal fire energy, and then the Saturn energy is going to want to hit the brakes. So it can be a really kind of frustrating time. But I think it's a really good time, because, Saturn's been in Pisces in the dream kind of state, whereas they're kind of polar opposites, whereas Saturn likes reality in the sign of Pisces, in that we can swim the murky waters of not really bringing things into concrete reality. But when it moves into Aries, I think it's a really good chance to harness and discipline our energies into putting something into something really positive. It can give us a lot of endurance on a positive level. It can also really make us want to, to develop a kind of drive in a slow and persistent way. And I think if people have a lot of projects that they really want to fulfill and get right into, now is a really good time to do it. It's all about disciplined action, right? It can also mean Saturn's quite cautious. So, caution with strategic planning, because, Aries is a sign of this, but as well. And there can be Potentially, probably changes in leadership, authority, this kind of thing. But I think one of the interesting things about this is we need to really, really learn how to cultivate this. I personally think, and I think I talked about this when Neptune ingresses into Aries as well, because all this action is going on at the time, and then when at that time when Saturn ingresses into Aries, it's going to be conjunct pretty much Neptune, which is the disease aspect or epidemic aspect, right? Most astrologers know this. So I think there's going to be a bit of a hoo-ha in world events around this again. We're going to get another taste of probably of what's happened. But I also think that it's going to be a really good time to actually initiate our goals and really bring them into concrete reality. Remember, Aries is a sign of the entrepreneur. It's about direction, it's about cultivation, it's about leadership abilities as well. So I just want to put out there for people, if you've got something you really want to put out into the world, now's the time to discipline your energies to be able to pursue it and put it out through there. It's really, really important because now's a really good opportunity to do that. And it's a good time to develop self through cultivating courage and daring. Aries is the daredevil. So to develop yourself, take a chance. You know, Saturn can give us the fear of making a leap in Aries. So jump into it. Don't be so afraid. Sometimes the Saturnian aspect can make us overcautious. And that's for a reason. Obviously, you know, people with a lot of cardinal fire can be absolutely reckless and have no fear, like Evil Knievel, and think people like this, the daredevil aspect, because Aries is that. But there's also a really good time to bring into your reality your tangible achievements and tangible efforts that you've been putting into whatever it is you want to achieve, right? Because now the spirit of the entrepreneur is coming in, and that's backed up by the age of 9 Feng Shui and Li, that cardinal fire. I think I've talked about this a little bit in other aspects. In other videos I've done. And so, you know, we've got this Mercury retrograding right on. I've just got my astrology clock here. We've got Mercury retrograding on Neptune here at the moment. So, you know, this can be a time for revisiting our psyches, right? This is a good time too. 29th degree is about endings of some kind. Mercury retrograding on that can bring up maybe a mental health issue that we've been mulling over or been really trying to get on top of, and now it's hitting the 29 degrees, and now it can be really, there's a lot of emphasis on so-called mental health, I guess, at the moment, and this is plaguing the ethers, right, through the mainstream media. My personal take on this as a practitioner, right, and I'm probably more so from the Reichian school, is and Thomas Saz, who wrote that book, The Myth of Mental Illness, I think a lot of mental health problems are due to unprocessed emotion, or what Wilhelm Reich calls the emotional plague. When we don't know how to process emotion, then of course our psyche or our mind is going to get deranged, right? So I think this is a really good time to revisit our psyches and things like this, because with having Mercury retrograding on Neptune at the moment, it's a good opportunity to do that, to clear up and sanitize whatever hasn't been sanitized within our own psyches. But one of the things I found really interesting about, on a collective level, not on a collective level, what am I saying here? On a 30 years ago, right? Because, or 29 point whatever it is years ago, prior to what happened, I was looking at world events, and of course I was looking more at my country, Australia, right, when it comes down to Saturn in Aries and what happened 30 years ago, right, around that ingression into that sign. And it was interesting because, and let me see, can I pull this up here on, let me just see if I can. Anyway, I had the chart of Australia here, but for some reason I can't draw it up because of this recording program. So I need to get some different software here. But I was looking back and doing my homework on this subject, and I was looking at world events because it's always good to check things out when things happen around these times. And of course, we had in Australia the Port Arthur massacre, right, at this time. And I'll do a separate video on this actually because this was interesting. But it was interesting how Saturn ingressed into Aries at that time, which in my opinion, because what we had, right, was after that incident, we had gun control, right? And most Australians had to hand in their weaponries. And you can look at Saturn ingressing into Aries as restrictions in firearms, right? And that's what happened here in Australia at the time. We don't have the gun culture like you guys do over in America. And I don't think in the US Americans will ever lose that, because if you look at the chart of America, it has a Mars conjunct Uranus, if I remember correctly, which is a sign of weaponry and firearms. So good luck for them going after the Second Amendment there. But here, after that massacre happened in Port Arthur, Tasmania, that at the time was exactly the same, and I think Mars was in Aries as well. But yeah, so I found that interesting, and maybe on a world theme this aspect may come up, but I'll do a separate video of this so I can show people the charts of exactly what's going on, because I think this is a key thing. And I want to check out obviously his astrology, which I have, just to see if the guy was really off kilter or was it an actual... Well, there's a lot of conspiracies around that, and that's another whole rabbit hole to go down, whether that actually was just him or there was a number of shooters. But me, myself, having shot and learned how to... I've recently learned how to, I haven't really shot guns as much before, but I have a firearms license now, so I do like going shooting, and I know how difficult it is. But... in a long shot. So I just found that interesting. In Australia, after that event, right, we had as Saturn ingress into Aries, we had that restriction of firearms here. And we can look at the Aries does rule weaponry, sharp instruments, guns, these kind of things, right? And Saturn in there is going to restrict and inhibit and gain control, because Saturn's all about control. But I also think... just on that psych level though, and probably from a health perspective, because we need to look at this as well, and we're looking at the Mercury retrograding over Neptune, and then we've got Saturn in Aries, right? And maybe on a collective level, I always look, if people have checked out my Aries Sun video in Cell Souls Astrology, then, obviously potassium phosphate is one of the key minerals to have, right? And can inhibit this, right? But then we also need to look, there's a number of things, and I haven't talked about the health perspective on things. I have in my Cell Salt videos, but really there's a lot of factors to consider. But I generally look into where Saturn is in the chart, because it will restrict and inhibit that mineral, and that will be more from a natal perspective, right? And then we need to look at transits, progressions, and all those kind of things, and of course horrors, right, if we have a specific health question. But on that level, right, I think Saturn ingressing into Aries is a monumental time and an interesting one, and it's going to be a really, really good one for coming into our own when it comes to the spirit of the entrepreneur, especially with Neptune goes into Aries as well, because Neptune rules the unconscious. And I think people on an unconscious level, which I mentioned Neptune, I've done a separate video on this, when Neptune does go into Aries, it will show, I think, hopefully, because there's flip sides to it, but will really bring people to the spirit of independence. Neptune going to Aries is the spirit of the warrior, and I think on some level Saturn there as well, because Saturn is really trying to discipline our energies. It's trying to discipline that cardinal fire to initiate really our own independence and bring in that spiritual entrepreneur into reality. So I'm hoping this really does happen. I hope there's a really big spike in independent thinkers, independent business, really taking the reins, taking the initiative, taking charge, having the balls to take charge. Whereas Saturn may hold the brakes and Aries will want to friggin' go headlong into it. But, because, sometimes with Saturn and Aries too, right, there can be an unconscious fear of coming first and putting ourselves out there. So there can be caution about starting things, right? Which is one of the negatives. We can overthink things to the point, oh, gee, should I do this? Should I do it? And then you weigh up the options and you overthink it and dissect it and you think, oh, God, it's all really too hard. And you can have that battle within ourselves. But I think it's a really good time to take initiative and really start these entrepreneurial type projects. So that's just kind of what I wanted to say about this in terms of Saturn in Aries, right? Will we have more control actually on, Australia, there's been, another, quite a few more attacks on, from machetes. So now in Australia, they're trying to restrict knives. We're having, they're illegal now. So there's all these kind of things. This is interesting that's kind of happened since then. But that's just what I want to say about that. If there's questions you guys have, I think it's important to act independently and really go for it when it comes to pursuing your own independence, your own goals, because we're shifting. This Piscean energy is shifting, from the dreamy, murky, collective sleep into something that is going to arouse. The fires are starting to be stoked from within people for them to really take charge and initiate their lives. So stay tuned. I'm going to do a few more Chinese astrological natal chart comparisons coming up, and I will look more into this Port Arthur incidents that happened 30 years ago at this time of the Saturn ingressing into Aries 29 years ago. So thanks for listening, guys, and jump in on my webinar if you're interested. Sign up to my newsletter and I will try and bring more astro topics to the channel, as well as health as well. So thank you.